and New Zealanders will get to decide that later this year.
Good speak.
Mr.
5-minute call, Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because you say it does not make it true. And to have to sit through a speech from that member of the House claiming that Labor, when it left office, left an economy that was damaged is an absolutely outrageous statement. Unless, of course, you deem damage to be 9 continuous budget surpluses, unless you consider damage to be 0 net Crown debt, unless you consider damage to be the highest continuous economic growth since World War II. It seems incredible to me that that side of the House has tried to completely rewrite history when it comes to the economic management of New Zealand under a Labor government. It is outrageous. It speaks to the lack of trust you can have in the way that government describes what's going on in the New Zealand economy today. Because, Mr. Speaker, what is not in doubt at all is that this is not an economy that is working for everyone. Everything that that member just said about the current economic status we're living under in New Zealand ignored what most New Zealanders are experiencing day to day. What he described was an environment where very few are doing well, but a lot are doing a lot worse, Mr. Speaker. And what I want to speak to is how this budget, this debate, these statements could have been different. How instead of just using economic markers, as the last member did around GDP, Crown debt, net deficits, how instead a budget should ultimately be about people. A budget should be about the outcomes for people. And what is the most consistent measure that you get groups like the OECD or even UNICEF talking about these days? They talk about how the true marker of a decent society isn't those economic indicators, but is how your young and your old fare in a society. Those are the kinds of markers that we as a nation should be focused on. And how are they faring? Well, even before the Treasury corrected its miscount recently, we know now, for instance, that our older citizens, the ones, for instance, who are renting but are in their retirement, we have a poverty rate amongst that group of 50%. 50% of our older citizens who are in rental accommodation are living in poverty. That is a marker of a society. 285,000 children living in poverty, 27%. That is a marker of a society. 14% of children are living below 50% of the median income. That is an increase after we found out about Treasury's significant error. Those children are living in severe poverty, not just poverty, severe poverty. And a large number of them are in their most vulnerable years, 0 to 4. That's the period when those children are spending the longest in that night. That is a marker. And how are those children faring under this economy? Rising power prices are impacting on those children. Rising housing costs. The average house price has gone up 24% under this government. Now, as much as that member talked about interest rates, these are families that don't have the luxury of owning a home and who are suffering significantly under increasing rents. High food prices are impacting on those vulnerable children. These are the measures, Mr. Chair, of a society, but that is not what this government is interested in. If they were, they would measure poverty. They would show leadership on it. They would have a plan. They would target to reduce it. They would report on that. And that is what this party would do. We have a bill that says when it comes round to speaking on the budget, we will put into the Public Finance Act that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Chair, will have to report on how much progress they have made on child poverty. That is the marker that we're going to put up next to current account deficits and GDP. How are our children in poverty faring? We will set a target to reduce it. We will build on our Best Start plan, which helps every single child under the age of 3 in poverty will benefit from Best Start, the weekly payment that we've introduced. Those are the kinds of measures of a society. Whether you look out, Mr. Chair, for your young, whether you look out for your old, and therefore that should be what budget statements are focused on.
Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Ngā mihi nui.